At my son's wedding, they replaced my seat with a trash can, my daughter-in-law said with a laugh. It's just a joke, don't be so dramatic. I stood there holding my cream-colored clutch so tightly my fingers began to ache. For a moment, I honestly thought I had walked to the wrong table. The ballroom at the Grand Magnolia Hotel shimmered with gold lights and crystal chandeliers. White roses filled towering glass vases. A string quartet played softly near the dance floor while waiters carried silver trays of champagne through the crowd. It should have been one of the happiest days of my life. My son Ethan was getting married. Instead, I found a black trash can sitting where my chair was supposed to be. Right in front of it was my place card. Mother of the groom. A few guests laughed nervously. Others quickly looked away, pretending not to notice. One younger woman covered her mouth in shock before her husband gently pulled her toward the bar. Vanessa, my daughter-in-law, stood beside the sweetheart table in her expensive designer gown, smiling as if she had done something clever instead of cruel. "Oh, come on," she said again, waving one manicured hand dismissively. "It's funny. Lighten up, Evelyn." Funny. I stared at the trash can for several long seconds. Someone had even tied a white satin ribbon around it to match the wedding decorations. That detail hurt more than I wanted to admit. Because it meant planning. Effort. Intention. Not a careless mistake. Not an accident. My son finally walked over, adjusting his tuxedo cuffs without meeting my eyes. "Mom," he muttered quietly, "Vanessa was only joking. Don't make this into a big scene." I looked at him then. Really looked at him. At the little boy I once stayed awake with through pneumonia when he was 7. The teenager whose college tuition I paid by working double shifts at the hospital after my husband died. The grown man whose first failed business I rescued with the life insurance money Frank left behind. And now he couldn't even look me in the eye. I smiled gently. Not because I found any of this amusing, but because years of motherhood had taught me something important. Humiliation becomes much easier when the people hurting you expect tears. "I'm glad to have you here," I said softly. "Follow my story until the end, and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached." Vanessa laughed awkwardly, probably relieved I wasn't screaming. But inside, something had shifted quietly. Something cold. Something final. Without another word, I picked up my place card from the table, folded it carefully, and walked toward the small staff table near the kitchen doors. No one stopped me. Not my son. Not my daughter-in-law. Not a single member of my family. And somehow, that hurt even more than the trash can itself. I sat at the small round table near the kitchen doors while the wedding reception carried on without me. From a distance, everything still looked beautiful. The chandeliers glowed warmly above the dance floor. Crystal glasses clinked together. Soft jazz floated through the ballroom while guests laughed over plates of filet mignon and roasted potatoes. Anyone walking into that room would have thought it was a perfect family celebration. That was the strange thing about humiliation. Most of the time, it hides best inside beautiful places. A young waiter approached my table carefully, almost apologetically. "Would you like more coffee, ma'am?" I smiled politely and nodded. "Thank you." His kindness nearly broke me more than the trash can had. Because at least a stranger still remembered I was human. I wrapped both hands around the warm porcelain cup and tried to steady myself. Across the ballroom, Ethan and Vanessa moved from table to table greeting guests, posing for photographs, laughing like nothing had happened. Vanessa looked radiant in her custom ivory gown. Ethan looked exhausted. Not guilty. Just tired. That realization settled heavily inside my chest. Years ago, after Frank passed away, I convinced myself my son was grieving too deeply to notice how distant he'd become. I blamed stress. Work. Marriage. Life. Mothers are very talented at protecting their children from the truth. Even when the truth is standing directly in front of them holding a champagne glass. I glanced down at the silver bracelet on my wrist. Frank had given it to me on our 40th anniversary during a trip to Charleston. He used to say elegant things quietly, as if love didn't need an audience. "You deserve softness after all these years," he'd told me that night. I almost laughed remembering it. Softness. There was nothing soft about tonight. A group of women at the nearby table lowered their voices when they noticed me looking over. One of them gave me a sympathetic smile before quickly turning away. They had seen the trash can. Of course they had. At weddings, people pretend not to stare while memorizing every detail. I took a slow sip of coffee. Cold already. The wedding planner suddenly appeared beside my chair holding an iPad against her chest. She looked nervous. "Mrs. Carter," she whispered carefully, "I just wanted to apologize about the seating situation." I gave her a calm smile. "You don't need to apologize. It wasn't your decision." Her expression changed slightly. Just enough. That tiny pause told me everything. Vanessa had planned it herself. Not impulsively. Not after too much champagne. Deliberately. The planner hesitated before leaning closer. "I actually questioned it earlier," she admitted quietly. "But the bride insisted everyone would think it was hilarious." Bride. Not Ethan. Somehow that should have comforted me. Instead, it made me feel worse. Because my son had still allowed it to happen. I thanked the planner softly and watched her hurry away toward the dance floor. Then I looked around the ballroom again. At the flowers I had partially paid for. The live band I had upgraded as a surprise gift. The honeymoon suite reservation currently sitting on my American Express card. Funny how quickly generosity turns invisible once people become comfortable receiving it. Across the room, Vanessa threw her head back laughing at something one of her bridesmaids said. Ethan finally noticed me watching. For one brief second, our eyes met. And he looked away first. That was when something inside me became very still. Not angry. Not emotional. Just clear. For the first time all evening, I stopped asking myself why they treated me this way. And started asking a much more important question. Why? Had I allowed it for so long? The rest of the reception blurred together after that. People kept eating. The band kept playing. Glasses kept clinking beneath the chandeliers as though nothing unusual had happened. But once humiliation enters a room, it changes the temperature of everything. Even the air felt colder. I stayed at the small table near the kitchen doors because I refused to leave early. Leaving would have given Vanessa exactly what she wanted, the satisfaction of watching me disappear quietly from my own son's wedding. So I remained seated with my back straight and my hands folded neatly in my lap. The same way my mother taught me decades ago. "Never let cruel people decide your dignity," she used to say. Across the ballroom, the photographer gathered family members near the floral arch for pictures. "Parents first," he called cheerfully. For a brief moment, I actually stood. Instinct, I suppose. A mother hears those words and responds automatically, even after being humiliated in front of 200 guests. But before I could take more than 2 steps, Vanessa glanced toward me with a tight smile. "Oh," she said lightly, "we already did the immediate family photos." Immediate family. The words landed harder than I expected. I stopped walking. The photographer looked confused. Ethan suddenly became very interested in fixing his cufflinks again. No one corrected her. Not even my son. One of the bridesmaids awkwardly pretended to rearrange bouquets to avoid looking at me. I slowly sat back down. Again. That seemed to be the theme of the evening. Being quietly moved aside. A few minutes later, my granddaughter Lily wandered over holding a slice of wedding cake on a tiny white plate. She was only 14, still young enough to be honest without realizing it made adults uncomfortable. "Grandma," she whispered softly, "I thought your seat thing was mean." I looked up at her tired little face and smiled gently. "Thank you for saying that." She hesitated before sitting beside me. Dad told Mom she shouldn't do it, Lily admitted quietly. But Vanessa said you were too sensitive and everyone would laugh. For the first time that evening, something sharp moved through my chest. Not because of Vanessa. Because Ethan knew. He knew beforehand. And he still let me walk into that ballroom unaware. Lily looked nervous after saying it, like she had accidentally broken an important rule. I squeezed her hand gently. You didn't do anything wrong, sweetheart. Children often become the accidental truth-tellers in families built on silence. Across the room, the DJ announced the mother-son dance. A few guests turned toward me expectantly. I felt every eye in the ballroom shift at once. Ethan froze near the dance floor. For one painful second, I thought maybe he would come get me anyway. Maybe guilt would finally overpower weakness. Instead, Vanessa leaned toward him and whispered something into his ear. Then my son walked toward his mother-in-law. Not me. Applause filled the ballroom while he danced with Vanessa's mother beneath soft golden lights. I sat completely still. No tears. No scene. Just stillness. The kind that comes when disappointment becomes familiar. Lily looked horrified beside me. That was supposed to be you, she whispered. I kept my eyes on the dance floor. Yes, I said quietly. It was. And suddenly, memories began lining up inside my mind differently. The ignored phone calls. The holidays shortened early. The times Ethan only visited when bills were due or business deals collapsed. For years, I told myself families drift naturally after marriage. But sitting there beside the kitchen doors while another woman danced in my place, I finally understood something painful. I hadn't been slowly excluded from their lives. I had been replaced. I watched the dance for less than a minute before looking away. The guests kept smiling politely, pretending everything felt normal. Vanessa rested her head against Ethan's shoulder while her mother laughed softly beneath the glow of the ballroom lights. It should have been me standing there with my son. Not because I needed attention, but because I had earned that moment. I lowered my eyes to the untouched slice of wedding cake sitting in front of me. Buttercream roses. Gold sugar flakes. Lemon filling. Vanessa had chosen the flavor after I suggested it months ago. During one of our planning lunches. Back then, I still believed she wanted me involved. Funny how easily women like her can imitate warmth when they need something. I remembered sitting across from her at a little cafe downtown last spring while she excitedly flipped through wedding magazines. Ethan says you always know how to make things elegant, she had told me sweetly. At the time, the compliment made me feel included. Now I realized it had probably been strategy. By then, I had already paid the deposit for the venue. A week later, I covered the florist after Ethan admitted they were a little short this month. Then came the live band. The honeymoon suite. The custom invitations. Every time they needed help, they came to me smiling. And every single time, I said yes. Because mothers rarely notice when love slowly turns into obligation. Especially widowed mothers. After Frank died, helping Ethan gave me purpose. The silence inside my house became easier to survive when I felt needed somewhere else. I babysat when Vanessa worked late. I paid off their credit card debt after Ethan's startup collapsed. I even refinanced part of my retirement investments 3 years earlier so they could make a down payment on their home in Denver. Vanessa cried that day. Actually cried. She hugged me tightly across the kitchen counter and called me family. Family. The word almost made me laugh now. Families protect each other from humiliation. Families do not replace your chair with a trash can and ask you not to be dramatic about it. Across the ballroom, Ethan spun Vanessa's mother beneath the music while photographers snapped pictures. Click. Smile. Click. Another memory surfaced quietly. 2 Christmases ago, Vanessa changed dinner plans at the last minute and forgot to tell me. I spent 6 hours cooking prime rib and sweet potato casserole while they celebrated at her sister's house instead. Ethan apologized afterward. Sort of. We thought you'd understand, he had said over the phone. And I did understand. That was the problem. I always understood. I understood missed birthdays. Late phone calls. Cancelled visits. Forgotten invitations. Little exclusions repeated so often they became normal. People treat your forgiveness like permission if you hand it to them too many times. Lily still sat beside me quietly picking frosting from her cake. Grandma, she asked carefully, are you mad at Dad? Children ask the hardest questions with the softest voices. I thought about it honestly before answering. No, I said at last. And strangely enough, that was true. Anger requires energy. What I felt now was something colder. Clarity. The kind that arrives slowly after years of making excuses for people who stopped deserving them. Near the dance floor, Vanessa suddenly looked toward me again. Her smile faded slightly when she realized I was calmly watching her. Not crying. Not leaving. Not breaking. For the first time all evening, she looked uncomfortable. And I think that was the exact moment she realized something important. Quiet women are not always weak women. The music changed after the mother-son dance. Something slower. Softer. Couples drifted back onto the dance floor while servers cleared empty champagne glasses from the tables. The ballroom smelled faintly of roses, candle wax, and expensive perfume. I remained seated near the kitchen doors, quietly watching people pretend not to stare at me. Humiliation makes guests uncomfortable. Not because they feel sorry for you. Because they're relieved it isn't happening to them. Lily had gone back to sit with her cousins, though she kept glancing toward me every few minutes like she was worried I might disappear. I appreciated that more than she probably realized. Across the room, Vanessa laughed loudly beside the bridal party while Ethan spoke with one of his college friends near the bar. Neither of them had approached me since the dance. That silence told me more than an apology ever could. A few minutes later, the wedding planner returned carrying a clipboard and an exhausted expression. You're still here, she said gently, almost surprised. I smiled faintly. It's my son's wedding. Something about my answer seemed to affect her. She glanced around carefully before pulling out the empty chair beside me. I probably shouldn't say this, she admitted quietly, but I felt awful. About what happened earlier. I stayed silent. People reveal more when you don't rush to comfort them. She lowered her voice further. When your daughter-in-law first requested the trash can set up during rehearsal yesterday, I honestly thought she was joking. Yesterday. Not spontaneous. Planned. The words settled heavily inside me. She told the staff you'd ruin the mood if you sat too close to the head table, the planner continued carefully. I suggested maybe using a different joke, but she insisted. I looked down at my folded place card resting beside my purse. Mother of the groom. So formal. So meaningless. Did my son know? I asked quietly. The planner hesitated. And hesitation is often the loudest answer in the world. He didn't stop it, she said finally. Not cruel words. Not dramatic words. Just honest ones. He didn't stop it. I thanked her softly for telling me the truth. She squeezed my shoulder once before standing again. I'm sorry, Mrs. Carter, she whispered. After she walked away, I sat there for a long time listening to the distant music. Funny thing about betrayal. The loud moments hurt first. But it's the quiet confirmations afterward that truly break something inside you. I thought about Ethan at 12 years old sitting beside me on the living room floor after Frank's funeral. He had cried into my sweater and promised, I'll always take care of you, Mom. Back then, he meant it. I truly believe he did. But people change slowly. Not all at once. Little compromises. Little silences. Little moments where protecting comfort becomes easier than protecting people. That's how loyalty disappears. Across the ballroom, Vanessa suddenly looked in my direction again. This time her smile looked tighter than before. Almost nervous. Maybe she expected tears. Maybe she expected me to leave early. Instead, I simply sat there calmly with my coffee cup and my dignity still intact. And for the first time all evening, I noticed something interesting. Vanessa kept watching me. Not the guests. Not the dance floor. Me. Because cruel people become uneasy when the person they tried to humiliate refuses to collapse. A few minutes later, my phone buzzed softly. Inside my purse. I almost ignored it. Almost. But when I glanced down at the screen and saw the name of my late husband's attorney, something inside me shifted again. Slowly. Quietly. Like a door beginning to open. I stared at my phone for several seconds before answering. The ballroom noise faded into the background as I pressed the device gently against my ear. Evelyn? Harold Bennett's calm voice came through the line. I hope I'm not calling it a bad time. Harold had been Frank's attorney for nearly 30 years. Careful man. Quiet man. The kind who still mailed handwritten Christmas cards every December. No, I said softly, glancing toward the crowded dance floor. Actually, your timing is interesting. I was reviewing some estate documents this afternoon, he continued. There's something regarding the family trust that requires your signature before Monday. The family trust. I hadn't thought about it in months. After Frank passed away 3 years earlier, I avoided most conversations involving money. Grief exhausts people in strange ways. Some stop eating. Some stop sleeping. I stopped paying attention. Harold cleared his throat gently. Would you be available to stop by my office next week? Before I could answer, laughter erupted near the bridal table. Vanessa stood surrounded by bridesmaids holding up a champagne glass dramatically while guests applauded. The perfect bride. The perfect evening. The perfect little performance. Mrs. Carter? Harold asked again. Yes, I replied quietly. I'll come. We ended the call a moment later, but I didn't put my phone away immediately. Instead, I stared at my reflection in the dark screen. Tired eyes. Carefully styled silver hair. Pearl earrings Frank once bought me during a trip to Savannah. I suddenly wondered when I had started becoming smaller in my own life. Not physically. Emotionally. Carefully making myself easier to ignore. Across the ballroom, Ethan finally approached my table alone. His tuxedo jacket hung slightly open now, and there was tension written all over his face. Mom, he said quietly, glancing around to make sure no one was listening, can we not do this tonight? I looked at him. Calmly. Do what? You know what I mean. He sighed heavily. Vanessa's upset. She thinks you're making everyone uncomfortable. For a moment, I genuinely thought I had misunderstood him. Then I realized I hadn't. The problem wasn't what they had done. The problem was my reaction to it. Or rather, my refusal to pretend it was acceptable. I folded my hands neatly in my lap. She replaced my chair with a trash can. Ethan. It was supposed to be funny. Funny. Such a convenient word cruel people use when they want immunity from consequences. I studied my son carefully beneath the ballroom lights. He looked older tonight. Not mature. Just worn down. Like someone who had spent too many years choosing peace over principle. You could have stopped it, I said quietly. His jaw tightened immediately. Mom, please. Don't ruin my wedding over one stupid joke. There it was. Not our relationship. Not my humiliation. His wedding. His comfort. His evening. I nodded slowly as if something had finally settled into place inside me. Then I asked the question that had been growing silently in my chest all night. Ethan, I said softly, if your father were alive tonight, would you have allowed this to happen in front of him? For the first time since walking into that ballroom, my son had no answer. None. His eyes dropped toward the floor. And in that silence, I suddenly understood something painful. Frank had not simply protected me during our marriage. He had protected Ethan from becoming this version of himself. A version willing to trade dignity for convenience. Ethan rubbed the back of his neck awkwardly before speaking again. "We'll talk later, okay?" Not an apology. Not regret. A postponement. I watched him walk back toward Vanessa without another word. And strangely enough, I didn't feel heartbroken anymore. Just awake. Near the dance floor, Vanessa slipped her arm through Ethan's and smiled triumphantly when she noticed him returning alone. But this time, when she looked at me, I smiled back. Small. Calm. Almost thoughtful. And for the first time all evening, her expression faltered. By the time the reception dinner ended, the ballroom had grown louder. Champagne loosened. Voices. High heels had been kicked off beneath tables. Groomsmen laughed too hard at jokes that weren't very funny, and the band switched from soft jazz to louder dance music that rattled the silverware. Weddings always change after dinner. People stop performing elegance and start revealing themselves. I stayed where I was near the kitchen doors, slowly sipping another cup of coffee I no longer wanted. Around me, servers cleared half-eaten desserts and folded linen napkins with tired efficiency. No one from my family came to sit beside me. Not once. That detail stayed with me more than the trash can. Because cruelty can happen in a moment. Neglect takes commitment. Across the room, Vanessa stood at the bar surrounded by bridesmaids. Her cheeks were flushed pink from champagne, and her laugh had grown louder as the evening went on. I watched her carefully now. Not emotionally. Observantly. There's a difference. People eventually reveal themselves when they believe they've won. One of the bridesmaids leaned toward her and whispered something that made the group burst into laughter. Vanessa glanced toward me briefly before covering her mouth dramatically. I didn't need to hear the joke to know who it was about. A strange calm settled over me. For years, I had mistaken tolerance for kindness. I kept forgiving behavior that should have ended conversations permanently. Frank used to warn me about that. You see the best in people long after they stop showing it, he once told me quietly. At the time, I considered it a compliment. Now I understood it was concern. Near midnight, I finally stood to leave the table and walked slowly toward the hallway leading to the restrooms. My heels clicked softly against the marble floor while guests continued dancing behind me. As I rounded the corner near the bar, voices stopped me. Vanessa's voice. Honestly, she acts like paying for a few things makes her royalty, she laughed. Another woman snorted into her drink. She looked ready to cry earlier. She's always dramatic, Vanessa replied casually. Ethan said she'd get over it eventually. She always does. I stopped walking. Not because I felt shocked anymore. Because hearing the truth spoken plainly can feel strangely peaceful after years of confusion. Another bridesmaid lowered her voice. Still, the trash can thing was kind of harsh. Vanessa laughed again. Please. If she wants respect so badly, maybe she should stop acting like a sad old widow all the time. Widow. The word hit differently coming from her mouth. Disposable. Embarrassing. Temporary. That was how she saw me. I stood quietly in the hallway for several seconds staring at the soft gold wallpaper while music pulsed faintly through the ballroom doors behind me. Then something unexpected happened. I stopped feeling hurt. Not completely. But enough to notice the difference. Pain keeps you emotionally attached to people. Clarity cuts the attachment. When I returned to the ballroom a few minutes later, Ethan was standing alone near the dance floor scrolling through his phone while Vanessa danced with friends. For the first time all evening, I noticed how tired my son looked. Not controlled. Not trapped. Just weak. There's an important difference between those things too. Weak people often allow cruelty because confronting it feels inconvenient. And everyone around them eventually pays the price for that weakness. Ethan glanced up as I approached. "You leaving already?" he asked distractedly. I looked at him for a moment. At the little boy I once rocked to sleep during thunderstorms. At the man who had just allowed his wife to humiliate his mother in public. "Yes," I answered softly. He nodded once. "Drive safe." That was all. No apology. No hug. No attempt to walk me out. Just two casual words offered like politeness to a stranger. "Drive safe." I smiled gently. "I always do," I said. And as I walked toward the ballroom exit alone, my phone vibrated once more inside my purse. This time, it was a message from Harold Bennett. The subject line read, "Urgent, trust amendment and property authorization." I stopped walking. Then slowly. I smiled. The hotel parking garage was almost empty by the time I reached my car. Midnight rain tapped softly against the concrete ceiling while distant music from the reception still echoed faintly through the elevator shaft behind me. I unlocked my silver Lexus slowly and sat inside for a moment without starting the engine. My hands rested quietly on the steering wheel. Still steady. That surprised me. I thought I would feel devastated after a night like this. Humiliated. Broken. Instead, I felt strangely calm. As though something exhausting had finally ended. My phone screen still glowed with Harold Bennett's message. "Urgent, trust amendment and property authorization." I opened the email carefully. Several attached documents appeared beneath Harold's short note. "Evelyn, while reviewing Frank's original estate structure, I noticed several assets still require your active authorization annually. One issue specifically concerns the Denver property investment connected to Ethan Carter Holdings LLC. Please contact me before signing or renewing anything. Regards, Harold Bennett, Denver Property Investment." I frowned slightly. That was Ethan and Vanessa's house. 3 years earlier, after Ethan's business failed, I had agreed to help them secure financing for the home. Vanessa cried at my kitchen table that afternoon, insisting they only needed temporary support until Ethan got back on his feet. I remembered believing her. I also remembered signing paperwork I barely read because grief still clouded everything back then. Frank had only been gone 6 months. When people are grieving, they trust the familiar voices around them. Even dangerous ones. Rain streaked across the windshield while I opened the attached files one by one. Property guarantee. Business liability extension. Secondary authorization holder. My name appeared everywhere. Not Ethan's. Mine. A strange feeling settled into my chest. Not satisfaction. Awareness. For the first time all evening, the balance of power no longer looked the way Vanessa probably imagined. I leaned back against the seat slowly. The house in Denver. Part of Ethan's business credit line. Even the honeymoon suite reservation. All connected to accounts or authorizations tied to me. And suddenly, several moments from the past few years rearranged themselves differently inside my memory. The rushed phone calls asking for signatures. Vanessa insisting certain papers were just routine. Ethan avoiding financial conversations entirely. They hadn't simply wanted support. They had needed access. Outside the car window, a young couple from the wedding stumbled through the rain laughing together beneath a shared umbrella. For a second, I thought about Frank again. About the way he used to study contracts line by line at the kitchen table every Sunday morning while drinking black coffee. "Never hand people control over the roof above your head," he once told Ethan firmly. Dependency changes relationships. Back then, Ethan rolled his eyes like young men often do when fathers sound overly cautious. Now I finally understood what Frank had been trying to prevent. Not financial ruin. Entitlement. I closed the documents slowly and stared through the rain-covered windshield. Inside the ballroom upstairs, Vanessa was probably still celebrating. Still laughing. Still convinced tonight had proven her importance in the family. But arrogance makes people careless. Especially cruel people. They focus so much on humiliating others that they forget to protect themselves. My phone buzzed again. Another message from Harold. There's more we need to discuss regarding the trust. Frank placed stricter protections in place than Ethan may realize. I read that sentence twice. Then a third time. Stricter protections. A small smile touched my lips before disappearing again. Not because I wanted revenge. At least, not the loud kind. I simply felt something I hadn't felt in a very long time. Safe. For years, I believed keeping peace inside the family required endless sacrifice from me. Money. Patience. Forgiveness. Silence. But sitting alone in that quiet parking garage while rain tapped softly against the windows, I finally understood something important. Peace built on humiliation is not peace at all. It's permission. And for the first time in years, I was no longer interested in giving it. I barely slept when I got home. The house felt painfully quiet after the wedding. Rain tapped against the windows while the grandfather clock in the hallway marked each passing hour with soft mechanical certainty. Frank used to wind that clock every Sunday evening. Funny how grief hides in ordinary sounds. I changed out of my navy blue dress carefully and hung it back in the closet instead of throwing it aside angrily. That surprised me too. A few years earlier, something like tonight probably would have shattered me emotionally. Now it simply clarified things. There's a difference between heartbreak and realization. Heartbreak begs people to love you again. Realization teaches you to stop asking. Around 6 in the morning, I made coffee and carried the mug into Frank's old study. The room still smelled faintly of cedar shelves and leather-bound books. His reading glasses remained exactly where he left them beside the desk lamp 3 years ago. Some mornings I still expected him to walk back into the room. I opened Harold Bennett's email again and read through every document carefully this time. Then I noticed something interesting. The honeymoon payment for Ethan and Vanessa's 2-week trip to Italy had not fully processed yet. The remaining balance was scheduled to transfer Monday morning through one of my investment accounts. My authorization was still pending. I stared at the screen quietly. Outside, pale morning light spread slowly across the backyard garden Frank planted years ago. Roses. Hydrangeas. White lilies near the fence. For so long, I believed being a good mother meant rescuing my son from consequences before they reached him. Maybe that had been my mistake. I picked up my phone and dialed Harold's office. He answered surprisingly quickly. I had a feeling you'd call early, he said gently. I need to understand everything connected to my name, I replied calmly. For the next 40 minutes, Harold explained details I should have paid attention to years ago. The Denver property guarantee. Business credit extensions. Several joint financial protections Frank had quietly structured before his death. And one final detail that made me go completely still. If you withdraw authorization, Harold explained carefully, certain luxury expenditures and unsecured transfers connected to Ethan's accounts would immediately freeze pending review. Luxury expenditures. Like a honeymoon suite overlooking Lake Como. I closed my eyes. Briefly. Not out of guilt. Out of clarity. Harold remained silent for a moment before speaking again. Evelyn, he said cautiously, I know this is difficult. But Frank specifically designed these protections to prevent anyone from taking advantage of your generosity. Generosity. Such a soft word for something that had cost me so much dignity. After we ended the call, I sat quietly in the study holding my coffee cup between both hands. Then my phone buzzed. Vanessa. A text message. Can you transfer the final honeymoon payment today? The resort says it's still pending. No greeting. No apology. Not even after last night. Just another request. I looked at the message for a long time. Then another one appeared. We leave tomorrow morning, so please don't forget again. Again. As though I were some unreliable employee instead of the woman who financed half their wedding. I smiled faintly. Not hurt. Not angry. Just finished. Very slowly, I opened my banking app. The pending authorization sat waiting on the screen beside the transfer amount. $18,740. Lake Como Luxury Resort Collection. For years, I would have approved it immediately to avoid tension. To keep peace. To feel needed. Instead, I pressed decline. One simple movement of my finger. Quiet. Clean. Final. The confirmation screen appeared instantly. Transfer cancelled. For a moment, I simply stared at the words. Then I set the phone down beside my untouched coffee and looked out the study window as sunlight slowly filled the garden. Somewhere across town, Vanessa was probably still sleeping peacefully beside my son, completely unaware that the first consequence of her cruelty had already arrived. And strangely enough, I didn't feel powerful. I felt free. The phone rang 37 minutes later. I know because I had just finished watering the hydrangeas in the backyard when Ethan's name flashed across the screen. I looked at it for a moment before answering. "Mom," he said immediately, his voice tight with panic. "Did something happen with the honeymoon payment?" No hello. No mention of the wedding. Just money. I continued trimming a dead rose carefully between my fingers. "Yes," I answered calmly. "I cancelled it." Silence. Not the peaceful kind. The stunned kind. "What?" he finally said. "Why would you do that?" I glanced across the garden where sunlight touched the white fence Frank built 20 years earlier. He used to spend entire weekends out there sanding wood while old jazz records played through the kitchen window. That fence had survived storms better than most marriages. "I think a better question," I replied softly, "is why you expected me to keep paying for things after what happened last night." Another silence. Then I heard Vanessa's voice sharply in the background. "Put me on speaker." Of course. A few seconds later, her tone burst through the phone bright and irritated. "Evelyn, the resort called us this morning completely confused. The transfer was already promised." Promised. Interesting word. Not appreciated. Not requested. Promised. I sat slowly on the wooden garden bench beneath the maple tree. "You replaced my chair with a trash can at my son's wedding," I said quietly. Vanessa sighed dramatically. "Oh my God. Are we really still doing this?" It was a joke. There it was again. The magical word cruel people use when they want forgiveness without accountability. Behind her, I could hear luggage wheels rolling across hardwood floors and hurried movement inside what sounded like a hotel suite. Their honeymoon morning. Not as peaceful as they expected. Good. Ethan finally spoke again. "Mom, can we please not ruin everything over one misunderstanding?" Misunderstanding. I almost smiled. Humiliation always becomes smaller when the people responsible start facing consequences. I leaned back against the bench and closed my eyes briefly. "When your father died," I said softly, "I spent 3 years convincing myself that loving you meant tolerating disrespect." Neither of them answered. "I paid your debts. Helped buy your home. Funded your wedding. And last night, you let your wife turn me into entertainment in front of strangers." Vanessa scoffed sharply. "You're being manipulative now." Manipulative. Another fascinating word. People often accuse you of manipulation the moment you stop making their lives easier. "I'm simply setting boundaries," I replied. Calmly. "You can't cancel our honeymoon because your feelings got hurt," Vanessa snapped. I opened my eyes slowly. Actually, I could. That was the part she failed to understand. For years, Vanessa mistook my kindness for weakness because weakness was easier for her to control. But kindness only looks fragile until it stops cooperating. Ethan exhaled heavily into the phone. "Mom, the resort says if we don't wire the remaining balance by noon, they'll release the villa reservation." Villa. Lake Como. Private terrace. Infinity pool. I remembered Vanessa proudly showing me pictures months ago while saying, "We deserve something unforgettable." Funny. So did I. I stood from the bench slowly and brushed dirt from my gardening gloves. "Then I suggest you figure something out," I said gently. "Mom, I spent years protecting both of you from consequences," I interrupted quietly. "Last night helped me realize how expensive that protection has become." Vanessa muttered something angry under her breath. For the first time, I no longer cared. Not enough to argue. Not enough to defend myself. Peaceful detachment is a strange feeling after years of emotional exhaustion. Before Ethan could speak again, I added one final sentence. "Your father would have been ashamed of what happened at that wedding." Complete silence answered me this time. Heavy silence. The kind truth leaves behind. Then I ended the call. Not dramatically. Not angrily. Just calmly. Afterward, I stood alone in the garden listening to birds move softly through the trees while morning sunlight warmed the roses around me. And for the first time in a very long while, I noticed something surprising. The world still felt beautiful even after disappointment. By noon, the honeymoon had officially collapsed. I didn't hear it from Ethan. Or Vanessa. I heard it from Lily. My granddaughter called just after lunch while I was folding laundry upstairs. Her small voice sounded nervous through the phone. "Grandma," she whispered, "Dad and Vanessa are fighting really bad." I sat slowly on the edge of the bed beside the neatly folded towels. "What happened?" "The Italy trip got cancelled," she said quietly. "Vanessa keeps yelling. About money. Money. Always money. Funny how quickly romance changes shape once invoices appear." I closed my eyes briefly. "Are you okay, sweetheart?" "I think so," she answered. Then after a pause, "Dad looks sad." That sentence stayed with me long after the call ended. Not because I wanted Ethan to suffer, but because sadness was probably the first honest emotion he'd felt in years. For too long, everyone around him protected him from discomfort. Me most of all. Later that afternoon, Harold Bennett arrived at the house carrying a slim leather folder beneath one arm. We sat together in Frank's study while sunlight filtered softly through the curtains. Harold reviewed documents carefully across the desk. The honeymoon cancellation triggered several financial notifications, he explained calmly. "Which means Ethan likely just realized how many accounts still depend on your authorization." I nodded slowly. No triumph. Just understanding. Harold adjusted his glasses before continuing. "There's something else you should know. Frank placed specific restrictions inside the trust after Ethan's second business loan." I looked up. "What kind of restrictions?" Harold opened the folder and slid a document toward me. "If there's evidence of financial exploitation or emotional coercion involving family assets, the discretionary distributions can be suspended entirely." I stared at the page quietly. Frank. Even after death, he had seen further ahead than I did. "He was worried people would take advantage of your loyalty," Harold said gently. Loyalty. Another soft word that often disguises suffering. Downstairs, the doorbell suddenly rang sharply through the house. Harold and I exchanged a glance. Then came a second knock. Harder this time. I already knew who it was. When I opened the front door, Ethan stood there alone. Still wearing yesterday's wrinkled wedding clothes. His tie hung loose around his collar, and dark circles shadowed his eyes like he hadn't slept at all. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then his gaze drifted past me toward Harold sitting inside the study. Confusion crossed his face first. Then realization. "Mom," he said slowly, "what's going on?" I stepped aside calmly. "You should come in." Ethan entered the house carefully like someone walking into unfamiliar territory. Strange, considering he grew up there. Harold greeted him politely but remained seated. That detail unsettled Ethan immediately. "What is this?" he asked. I folded my hands together quietly. "A conversation we should have had years ago." His jaw tightened. "If this is about the honeymoon, it stopped being about the honeymoon when your wife replaced my chair with a trash can." The room fell silent. Heavy. Unavoidable. Ethan rubbed both hands across his face exhaustedly. "Mom, I already told you she was joking." "No," I replied softly. "She was testing how much disrespect I would tolerate." That sentence landed harder than I expected. Because deep down, Ethan knew it was true. He sank slowly into the chair across from Frank's desk and suddenly looked much younger than 42. Not innocent. Just tired. Tensions got out of hand, he muttered weakly. I studied my son quietly. Then I asked the question that had lived inside my chest all day. "Ethan, if Lily watched her future husband treat me the way you treated your mother last night, would you tell her to tolerate it?" His eyes lifted toward mine immediately. And for the first time since the wedding, I saw shame. Real shame. Not embarrassment. Not inconvenience. Shame. He opened his mouth to answer. But no words came out. Ethan sat silently across from me for a very long time after that. The afternoon light stretched across Frank's study in soft golden lines while the grandfather clock downstairs ticked steadily through the silence. Harold quietly gathered a few papers into his leather folder and stood. "I'll give you both some privacy," he said gently. Neither of us stopped him. After the front door closed, the house became still again. Ethan leaned forward with his elbows resting on his knees, staring at the hardwood floor like he no longer recognized the person he had become. I knew that feeling. Life does that sometimes. One painful moment suddenly forces you to meet yourself honestly. "I didn't think it would go this far," he admitted quietly. I looked at him carefully. "That's because you never believed there would be consequences." The words weren't cruel. Just true. He rubbed his wedding ring nervously. "Vanessa thinks you're trying to destroy our marriage." I almost smiled at that. People often call boundaries destruction when they benefited from your lack of them. "I didn't ruin your marriage, Ethan," I said softly. "Your wife humiliated your mother in public, and you stood beside her while it happened." His eyes closed briefly. For the first time since arriving, he looked exactly like the little boy who used to cry after disappointing his father. "I know," he whispered. Outside, wind moved gently through the trees beyond the study windows. Somewhere upstairs, an old floorboard creaked softly inside the house Frank built 40 years earlier with his own hands. A real home. Not just a property. A place where people were supposed to feel safe. "I spent years protecting you," I continued quietly. "After your father died, I thought helping you financially meant I was keeping this family together." Ethan finally looked up. "But all I really did was teach you that I would survive anything." Tears filled his eyes immediately after that. Not dramatic tears. The quiet kind grown men try to hide. "I'm sorry, Mom." The words came out broken. Late. But real. And strangely enough, hearing them didn't feel victorious. It felt sad. Because apologies cannot return years once respect disappears. I reached over slowly and placed my hand across his trembling one. "I love you," I said softly. That never changed. His shoulders shook once as he lowered his head. "But love without respect destroys people," I added gently. "Especially mothers." The room fell quiet again. Not hostile. Just honest. After a while, Ethan stood slowly from the chair and looked around Frank's study. His eyes lingered on old family photographs lining the bookshelf. Birthdays. Camping trips. Christmas mornings. Back when we still looked like a family instead of strangers connected by obligation. "I don't know how things got this bad," he admitted. I did. Little silences. Little excuses. Little acts of cruelty nobody stopped. That's how families fall apart. Not all at once. Piece by piece. Ethan left shortly before sunset. At the front door, he hesitated awkwardly before hugging me tightly for the first time in years. The kind of hug people give when they suddenly realize loss is possible. "I'll fix this," he whispered. I didn't answer. Some things cannot be repaired quickly. Some trust returns slowly, if it returns at all. After he drove away, I made myself a cup of tea and carried it onto the back porch. Evening sunlight painted the garden gold while cicadas hummed softly in the distance. Peaceful. For the first time in a very long while, the silence around me no longer felt lonely. It felt earned. My phone buzzed once beside the teacup. A message from Ethan. "I'm ashamed of what happened. Dad would be disappointed in me." I stared at the words quietly before locking the screen again. Then I looked out across the garden Frank planted all those years ago and finally allowed myself to breathe deeply. At my son's wedding, they replaced my seat with a trash can. But in the end, the only thing truly thrown away was the version of me willing to accept disrespect just to keep the peace.